fantastic. And so, thank you for coming and checking out this live stream. And I wanted to talk a lot about a little group known as the Cult Awareness Network and the sordid history uh, behind it and why I don't think we can trust them not anymore these days. And so thanks again for being here, and please do remember to drop a like on your way in. And so, who are the Cult Awareness Network? Well, we should really separate them into two halves. You have from the mid 70s until the mid 90s, that we would call the original Cult Awareness Network, and or the old Cult Awareness Network, but something nuts happened to them in 1996, and we'll talk about that a little later. And that ended up leading them into being, well, apparently still there, but run by a cult. So, anyway, who are the Cult Awareness Network? Like I mentioned, they were really active during the mid 70s until the mid 90s, and they were really a group that was just spearheading the anti cult movement that came out of the 70s. And this, of course, goes back to in the late 60s and the 70s. You had lots of people uh, like teenagers reaching college age and whatnot and going off and finding all these new religious movements that were going on at the time, and a lot of them, ended up being cults. I'm gonna try to fix the lighting. Okay, maybe that's a little better. Um, and so the Cult Awareness Network, from the mid 70s until the mid 90s, they were a place where parents who thought they were losing their kid into a cult could call them and say, what do I do? How do we do anything about this? And they didn't just help cult victims and their families. They were also operating, well, they were sharing a lot of information. They were disseminating a lot of information to the general public and the media about mind control cults and brainwashing and all of this. And they were really targeting 200 different organizations they were looking at that they had identified as cults. And again, specifically, they were really concentrating much on the mind control and the brainwashing cults. And so, where did they start? They started in, oh, hi, it's nice to see some people in the chat. Good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for being here. And I'm glad to see you there. And so, anyway, the Cult Awareness Network, they were a place they would disseminate information about cults and about mind control groups for the general public, and they would also help cult victims, people who had fallen into cults and their families, and specifically, it was often parents who were all like, our kid is in a cult, help us get them out. And so, again, they targeted about 200 different groups altogether. But we really have two main groups were their biggest targets of all. They really identified two big targets. And just before I talk about them, I'll talk about the other thing that the Cult Awareness Network was involved with besides disseminating information about cults. They were also, if parents wanted help getting a kid out of the cult, they might hook them up with a deprogrammer. And so deprogramming got them into a lot of heat. That's a lot of people had problems with this. And the thing is, the Cult Awareness Network would have never really existed without a deprogrammer. His name was, I do believe, Ted Patrick. And so, what Ted Patrick started the Cult Awareness Network for under the name Citizens Freedom Foundation. So, the Citizens Freedom Foundation, that was what the Cult Awareness Network was known as at the very first. And it was started by a deprogrammer named Ted Patrick, who got worried because one of his teenage children almost got taken away in a cult, and so he got worried about that and heard other people in his neighborhood had similar things going on. And so he got into deprogramming. And what is deprogramming? That gets that's where the Cult Awareness Network and well, their associates' actions get a little dicey because this involves really kidnapping somebody that you suspect has, well, that you allege has been sucked into a cult, and then detaining them for a while and deprogramming them, taking away their mind control or the brainwashing they got from the cult. But that to me is a little dicey because it's uh, you're trying to de-brainwash people, but doesn't that mean you might actually just be trying to re-brainwash them in a different way, in a different direction? And so, by the way, it's not legal. If that cult member is an adult and they're, really against being abducted and all this, it's not even going to be legal to do that kind of thing. So, some of the deprogrammers were called criminals. Although, if the so called cult member is a minor and you do have their parents' consent, that ends up, I think, making it totally legal. So, anyway, they would be involved in the deprogramming, which is part of what ended up taking them down in a lawsuit. And so, before I get to the lawsuit, let's talk about who were the two biggest groups that the Cult Awareness Network targeted. That would be an educational group called Landmark Education and the Church of Scientology. Those were the two big groups they targeted. And Landmark Education, it was a so called educational group, all very Timothy Leary style, turn on, tune in, drop out kind of a deal. Not exactly his group or anything, but that kind of a deal. So just trying to point that out. And they were against, that group brainwashing anybody. And so the other group, I think the main target of Ken was the Church of Scientology. And that ended up being a big part of the downfall too, because the Church of Scientology, well, they are very litigious. They sue people a lot, for one. And also, as soon as they were all mad at CAN, the Cult Awareness Network, for identifying them as a cult, they start fighting back. They start really pushing back. Like, uh, it was reported that Scientology had even hired PIs to dig up dirt on the members of CAN to try to discredit them and trash their reputation. In addition to that, Scientology was putting out a lot of literature at the time calling CAN a hate group and a bunch of criminals and all that. And so they were really launching a big hate campaign against CAN, who they were calling anti-religion and a hate group. But that's funny because CAN had similar feelings about Scientology. So anyway, in addition to all the smear campaign for their reputation, a bunch of Scientologists ended up being directed to write letters trying to join CAN, trying to participate in CAN conferences and other CAN events and all that, and join CAN. And so CAN was super worried that Scientology is trying to take over the Cult Awareness Network, so no, we're going to tell them all no. And so they did. And I think it was like more than 50 individual Scientologists who each got a big fat no from Can. And, excuse me, and then afterwards, these same Scientologists who were denied entrance to Can, they went ahead and sued them individually, each sued them. And so Can faced more than 50 lawsuits in that period. And so we're talking in the 90s now, we're talking in the mid 90s. And Can ended up going pretty much bankrupt by defending themselves from all these lawsuits. Like whether they won the lawsuit or it got dropped or anything, still it cost them nearly $2 million to defend themselves from all these lawsuits. And then, and so these were all from different Scientologists. So that was on top of just destroying Can's reputation. They wanted to cripple them financially. And most of those suits didn't really work because Ken won some and all that, but they were getting low on funds at that point. And then a Scientologist lawyer ended up filing a suit for someone who was not a Scientologist, but he jumped on that chance because he thought, oh, I think we found the lawsuit that's really going to take Ken down finally. So the individual who the lawsuit was filed on behalf of, Jason Scott, he was not actually a Scientologist. He was a member of the United Pentecostal Church, something like that. So not the Church of Scientology. But the Scientologist lawyer, Kendrick Moxon, jumped on the chance to take Scientology down with a lawsuit by this kid because this kid they had this kid's parents had gotten in touch with Can, and Can put them in touch with a deprogrammer named Rick Ross. And this deprogrammer and two of his associates kidnapped Jason Scott and held him against his will for 5 days while they attempted to deprogram him, and it didn't work. After 5 days of attempted deprogramming, it still didn't work, and so after all this, Jason Scott is like, "Hey, that was not legal. You have no right to kidnap me or try to deprogram me. So I'm gonna sue you." So Scientology jumped on top of that. Again, the lawyer's name was Kendrick Moxon. And after that suit, the deprogrammer had to pay, I think, $2.5 million, something like that, and his two associates, I think, had to pay $250,000 apiece, and Can had to pay like $1.8 million, something like that, and that finally bankrupted them. And so, but the big twist is what's going to happen in bankruptcy court and all that, which Scientology is finally like, hooray, we're destroying Can, so nobody's there to take down our cult, right? uh, Very cool. I'm so glad to see so many of you are here, and happy birthday, by the way. I love seeing that. Someone's here on their birthday. Fantastic. Anyway, so what happened with bankruptcy court? They had to, go ahead, they're declaring bankruptcy because they can't pay these judgments. They're completely bankrupted by all the lawsuits and all that. And so they have to sell off their assets, which means they had to sell off their name and their logo, even their office equipment, and the hotline phone number for people to call Can and all that, and their P.O. box, and everything that Can had basically was put up for sale on the cheap. And guess what happened? Then Stephen Hayes, he was another Scientology attorney and Scientologist. he ended up buying up all of Can's assets, Can's name, its logo, the hotline, everything for $20,000. So that's why after 1996, Can has really not been the same. It really hasn't been the same, and why is that? Because the Scientologist who purchased it for 20 grand ended up reviving the name and the logo and all that, and opening it again, not directly under the Church of Scientology, but under associates of the Church of Scientology. So now, starting in 1997 and to this day, so for the last like 29 years, um, if someone does call Can, it's very likely there's going to be a Scientologist answering the phone. Which by the way, once upon a time, people were calling Can saying, "Help me get my kid out of Scientology. It's a cult," and all that. And now you're going to get a Scientologist on the phone if you do call them. And they still do, by the way, have a website. It's called, the website, it's very simply cultawarenessnetwork.org. So you can go check that out if you want. But again, I wouldn't recommend giving any of them your information, like your email, phone number, name, any of that, because again, Scientology. You don't want Scientology to end up getting your data either. So that's yeah. So that's the weird big twist. The first Can spearheading the anti-cult movement from the 1970s until about 20 years later in the mid 90s, and then Scientology goes ahead and litigates them out of money, basically bankrupts them, snatches them up for on the cheap when they're having to sell off their assets in bankruptcy court, and then now reopens the new Can, the post 1997 Can, who still, pretends to be someone who can help. If you know someone if you have a family member in a cult that needs help, but they really don't offer the same services anymore. They say they give literature out on cults and all that, and even if if you have a family member that you're worried about is in a cult, they might put you in touch with an expert on that religious to let you learn more about the practices and beliefs of that religion and whatnot. But it makes me worry if you might call the Cult Awareness Network and they're just all like, "Oh yeah, there's no cults to see here, right? Don't worry about Scientology." Right? Anyway, that to me is just too funny, and I didn't just couldn't help myself but bring that to this YouTube channel, because I had no idea that the Cult Awareness Network has now been run by pretty much a front group for a cult for the last 29 years. So I wouldn't, if I were you, I wouldn't trust them. Anyway, really wouldn't trust them. And anyway, so that's, yeah, I guess that's about all I had to share about the Cult Awareness Network and why you can't really trust them, because they have been for nearly 3 decades now run by associates of Scientology, who prior to this had been the biggest target of all of Can as a brainwashing cult, pretty much. So there you go. That's the whole story. And thank you everybody again for listening to me ramble about all this. I had a lot of fun doing this. And does anybody have any questions or comments in the chats? I'm just going through the chat. I'm so happy to see Sunshine is here as usual. And we've got Megan Stapleton, I think. I don't want to mispronounce anybody's name. And Tracy Davis. Fantastic. I'm glad to see so many people are here. And, oh, yeah, and the birthday person, and who also mentioned we can call her Lily. And yeah, hi. Very cool. Anyway, nice to see you all here. But I think that's all I had to say about the Cult Awareness Network. And again, just to sum it up, from the 70s until the 90s, they were spearheading the anti cult movement in the US. They were a nationwide group, mostly based out of Chicago originally, but had places in different cities around the country, and sadly got litigated right out of existence by the Church of Scientology and by the very suspicious practice of um, hooking family members up with a group who might kidnap your cult victim family member and hold them against their will for a little while. All that. And sadly, yeah, we can't trust them anymore because I do believe they are now run by Scientology, or at least by people associated with Scientology. Anyway, so that's my whole story. So thanks again for watching. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, all we do here on the channel is things related to language and culture. And here's a little language for you. You can't spell culture without cult, now can you? Anyway, just kidding. But still, thanks again, and I'm looking to talking to you again in my next premiere, which is going to be very, very soon. But until then, I'll catch you on next time. Bye bye.